The NIGMA Empire had long believed themselves to be the apex of galactic civilization. For centuries, they had spread their influence through the stars, conquering planets and bending entire species to their will. Their fleets were vast, their soldiers unyielding, and their technology advanced beyond what most of the galaxy could comprehend. Yet, in all their arrogance, they failed to see the threat posed by humanity. The Empire first learned of Earth through intercepted transmissions, simple signals traveling through the cosmic void. To the NIGMA High Command, Earth was nothing more than a primitive rock inhabited by a race of weak, fragile beings. They had conquered greater powers before, and the humans, with their relatively small homeworld, seemed inconsequential. The humans were nothing more than another obstacle to be swept aside. When a human delegation arrived to warn the Empire, the NIGMA Council laughed. "Do not come for us," the human envoy said. "We are not like the others you've conquered. If you push us, we will push back." The NIGMA scoffed. They had heard such threats before from other species, only to see those species fall in line or face obliteration. Why would these humans be any different? The High Command issued their orders. A small strike force would be dispatched to the Sol system, not to annihilate but to test. They believed it would be a show of force, a demonstration of their might to bring the humans to their knees without the need for a full-scale invasion. The task was given to Commander Rakash, an experienced leader who had overseen countless conquests. He found the assignment beneath him but obeyed nonetheless. The fleet launched toward Earth, expecting no resistance worth mentioning. As the ships descended upon the outer perimeter of the solar system, they encountered their first human defenses. A series of small space stations and automated drones moved to intercept the NIGMA forces. The NIGMA laughed. This was hardly even a challenge. They fired upon the stations, breaking through them with minimal effort. But something was off. The human forces did not retreat, nor did they panic. They moved with precision, each action deliberate, as if they had anticipated the NIGMA's every move. And despite the overwhelming odds, the humans held their ground, causing small but noticeable losses to the NIGMA fleet. Rakash found himself annoyed, not threatened. These humans were stubborn, he thought, but stubbornness wouldn't save them. He ordered a full assault, believing it would crush the human defenses swiftly. Yet, as the NIGMA fleet pressed forward, they encountered more resistance than they had predicted. Human ships, though fewer in number and less technologically advanced, utilized tactics that were unfamiliar to the NIGMA. Guerrilla strikes, coordinated flanking maneuvers, and hit-and-run tactics began to slow the NIGMA's advance. Even more frustrating for Rakash was the humans' refusal to beg for mercy. Other species had cowered before the NIGMA, offering their surrender the moment they realized the extent of the Empire's power. But not these humans. They fought back, with an almost reckless disregard for their own survival, as if every loss on their side only made them fight harder. Despite the growing resistance, the NIGMA pressed on. They were confident that it was only a matter of time before the human forces crumbled under the weight of the Empire's superior technology. After all, the humans couldn't possibly hold out forever. Yet, the warnings continued. Broadcasts from Earth, intercepted by the NIGMA, repeated the same message: "Turn back now. You do not know what you are dealing with." Rakash ignored the warnings, pushing forward with renewed determination. He would bring Earth to its knees, and when the humans finally surrendered, they would serve as a grim reminder to the rest of the galaxy of what happens when you defy the NIGMA Empire. The NIGMA strike force entered Earth's orbit with the same air of superiority they had carried across countless worlds. Their ships hovered above the planet like predatory birds, awaiting the moment to strike. Earth, from their vantage point, appeared small, insignificant, hardly worth the effort. The NIGMA commanders expected a swift submission. After all, they had pierced the outer defenses with minimal resistance. But the humans below remained disturbingly silent. Then came the first strike. A series of human ships, smaller and less advanced than the NIGMA cruisers, shot out from the surface, moving faster than expected. The NIGMA ships opened fire, believing this to be the beginning of the end for Earth's defenses. However, the human ships didn't engage in direct combat. They danced around the NIGMA vessels, luring them into pursuit before vanishing into the atmosphere. Urkash, observing from the command deck, was irritated but not concerned. He saw the humans' tactics as desperate, last-minute attempts to stall the inevitable. He ordered his fleet to follow the human vessels, confident that they could be crushed once cornered. But the human ships never stayed in one place for long. They would strike in brief, precise bursts, damaging systems and then retreating before the NIGMA could fully retaliate. It was a strategy Urkash hadn't encountered before. Most civilizations attempted to meet the NIGMA in open combat, to their downfall. These humans, however, seemed to be playing a different game, one of patience and persistence. They weren't trying to win outright, they were bleeding the NIGMA slowly, exploiting their arrogance. Each attack seemed to chip away at the NIGMA's superiority, frustrating the commanders. Hours turned into days, and the initial sense of inevitability began to wane. The human forces, though fewer in number, were tireless. They knew the terrain, understood their enemy, and used their home advantage to maximum effect. The NIGMA commanders were forced to admit that their expected swift victory was slipping through their fingers. Still, none dared voice these concerns aloud. On the ground, NIGMA forces encountered a similar issue. Where other species had folded under the pressure of an invasion, the humans dug in. Cities became fortresses, civilians became soldiers, and every street, every building was a battleground. The NIGMA troops, trained in overwhelming force and intimidation, were not used to facing an enemy who fought with such tenacity. Human resistance fighters struck from the shadows, vanishing as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind only wreckage and chaos. Communication lines were scrambled, NIGMA supply routes were disrupted, and morale began to falter. Urkash had never seen anything like it. The humans weren't stronger or better equipped, but they were relentless. And they didn't fear the NIGMA. That much was clear. Even the civilians fought with a savagery that unnerved the soldiers. For every NIGMA victory, the humans seemed to take 10 more steps toward reclaiming their ground. Then came the second warning. It wasn't broadcast across channels or delivered by a desperate ambassador. It came in the form of a message intercepted from a human commander during one of the skirmishes: "We warned you." This time, it wasn't a plea. It was a promise. The NIGMA commanders felt the shift but refused to acknowledge it openly. They had invaded countless worlds, broken entire civilizations, and brought untold destruction to planets more formidable than this one. Yet here they were, held in place by a species they considered beneath them. As the human attacks continued, the NIGMA realized something unsettling: this wasn't random resistance. The humans were operating with a strategy, one that was dismantling the NIGMA forces bit by bit. For every cruiser the NIGMA sent into battle, the humans had a counter. For every tactical advance, the humans had an answer. It was as though the humans had spent years preparing for this very moment, waiting for the NIGMA to make their move. Urkash, who had once dismissed the humans as irrelevant, found himself for the first time doubting his decision to press forward. He refused to admit it, but the thought lingered: maybe the humans weren't bluffing after all. The NIGMA Empire launched their full invasion on Earth, confident that they had finally worn down the human defenses. They unleashed their vast armies, legions of elite soldiers, advanced combat drones, and towering war machines, all descending upon Earth cities. It was supposed to be the moment of triumph, the crushing blow that would force humanity to submit. Instead, it became the turning point. As the NIGMA forces touched down, they were immediately met with fierce resistance. Human military forces, now fully mobilized, coordinated in a way that caught the NIGMA off guard. Earth cities were not chaotic battlegrounds but heavily fortified strongholds. Streets were lined with barricades, and every building had been turned into a defensive position. The NIGMA soldiers expected to storm through helpless civilians, but instead, they found themselves fighting for every inch of ground. Human snipers picked off commanders from hidden perches, while ground troops used the environment to their advantage, drawing the NIGMA forces into narrow alleys where their superior numbers counted for nothing. Guerrilla tactics, which the NIGMA thought they had mastered, were being used against them with ruthless precision. Each ambush was carefully planned, every retreat a feint to lure NIGMA troops into traps. Hfy, overseeing the invasion from orbit, could hardly believe the reports coming in. How could these humans, with their outdated technology and smaller forces, be holding off the might of the NIGMA? It made no sense. He ordered his commanders to push harder, to overwhelm the humans through sheer force, but it wasn't enough. The humans were too adaptive, too unpredictable. Every time the NIGMA thought they had the upper hand, the humans shifted tactics, countering with strategies the NIGMA hadn't anticipated. The NIGMA's technological superiority, which had won them so many wars, became less of an advantage in the dense urban combat on Earth. Their massive war machines struggled to navigate the narrow streets, while human infantry moved swiftly through underground tunnels and rooftops, striking from all angles. Even their air superiority was challenged by human anti-aircraft systems that had been hidden deep within the city infrastructure, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the NIGMA forces pushed deeper into human territory, they began to suffer heavier casualties than anticipated. Supply lines were cut off, communications were jammed, and their forces found themselves increasingly isolated from one another. Human hackers broke into NIGMA systems, disrupting their command chains and causing confusion on the battlefield. What should have been a one-sided invasion was turning into a war of attrition. On top of that, the human resolve was unlike anything the NIGMA had encountered. Civilians took up arms, fighting alongside soldiers with a determination that unnerved the NIGMA troops. They weren't just defending their cities, they were fighting for their very survival. Every death seemed to fuel their resistance even more. There was no fear in their eyes, only a cold, calculated fury that made the NIGMA question whether they had ever truly understood the humans at all. As the days dragged on, the NIGMA commanders began to feel the strain. The invasion, which was supposed to be swift and decisive, had turned into a bloody stalemate. The humans were proving far more resilient than anyone had anticipated. Hfy, for the first time in his career, began to doubt the wisdom of continuing the fight. But pride and arrogance still held him back from ordering a retreat. He was convinced that, with just one more push, the humans would break. But that push never came. Instead, the NIGMA found themselves increasingly on the defensive. Human forces, now bolstered by their early victories, began launching counterattacks. They targeted key NIGMA positions with surgical precision, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the invaders at every turn. NIGMA strongholds, once thought impenetrable, fell one by one as the humans exploited every weakness they could find. The more the NIGMA fought, the more it became clear that they had underestimated their enemy. This wasn't a battle they could win through sheer force or superior firepower. The humans had something the NIGMA had never faced before, an unbreakable will, a refusal to surrender even in the face of overwhelming odds. And for the first time, Hfy began to fear that the warnings he had dismissed might have been right all along. As the tide of battle shifted, the NIGMA Empire found themselves caught in a war they never expected. Their invasion had stalled, and what was supposed to be a quick conquest turned into a desperate struggle for survival. Human forces, now emboldened by their early victories, began pushing back with a ferocity that shocked the NIGMA commanders. For every inch the NIGMA took, they lost ground elsewhere. And it wasn't just their soldiers who suffered, their entire empire began to feel the strain of the prolonged conflict. Humanity, no longer content with simply defending their planet, launched coordinated counteroffensives. They didn't just push the NIGMA forces out of their cities, they took the fight to space. Fleets of human warships, backed by newly developed technology, began to engage NIGMA forces across the solar system. The NIGMA's once dominant fleets were now struggling against a foe that had adapted to their every tactic. Hfy received reports of entire NIGMA battalions being wiped out by human strikes that seemed to come out of nowhere. Communications were being hacked, supply chains disrupted, and key military leaders assassinated by human operatives. These humans were no longer the primitive species the NIGMA had dismissed. They had become a relentless force, determined to dismantle the empire piece by piece. Desperation began to spread through the NIGMA ranks. Their soldiers, once confident and eager for glory, now faced an enemy who refused to fight on their terms. The humans didn't play by the rules of conventional warfare. They were cunning, ruthless, and unpredictable. And worse, they fought like they had nothing to lose. Every attempt to outmaneuver them was met with brutal resistance. Every advance ended in disaster. The final blow came when the NIGMA High Command, in a desperate attempt to regain control, sent their most elite forces to Earth for one last assault. These were the best soldiers in the Empire, trained for years in the art of war, and they were expected to crush the human resistance once and for all. But as they descended into Earth's atmosphere, they were met with something they had never seen before: humanity's full military might, unleashed without restraint. The humans had been holding back, waiting for the right moment to strike. Now, they revealed the full extent of their technological advancements, innovations forged in the fires of war. Advanced drones, energy weapons, and mechanized suits tore through the NIGMA ranks. The humans had adapted faster than the Empire could react, and now they were using their newfound power to devastating effect. Within days, the elite NIGMA forces were decimated. Their commanders were captured or killed, and the few survivors fled in terror, leaving behind the remnants of what was once considered an unstoppable invasion. It became clear to everyone, both within the NIGMA Empire and the rest of the galaxy, that the war was lost. Back on NIGMA's homeworld, panic spread as the news reached the central government. The Empire had never faced a defeat like this before. Entire sectors began to break away, declaring independence rather than be associated with the crumbling regime. Revolts broke out on conquered worlds, emboldened by humanity's victory. The NIGMA leadership, once so proud and untouchable, now found themselves isolated, their empire disintegrating around them. Desperate to salvage what was left, NIGMA officials reached out to humanity for a ceasefire. But the humans didn't respond. The NIGMA had pushed too far, and now they would face the consequences. There would be no mercy, no negotiations. Humanity had made their stance clear: those who threatened Earth would pay the ultimate price. In a final act of desperation, the NIGMA Emperor himself broadcast a message to the galaxy, pleading for aid. But it was too late. The galaxy had seen the fall of the NIGMA firsthand, and no one was willing to stand beside them now. The Empire's arrogance had sealed their fate. One by one, NIGMA worlds fell, not to invasions but to internal collapse. Their soldiers deserted, their leaders fled, and their people turned against them. What was once the most feared empire in the galaxy was now little more than a fractured collection of isolated systems, each struggling to survive in the chaos. And in the center of it all, humanity stood victorious, their warning to the NIGMA now fulfilled. With the NIGMA Empire in shambles, humanity turned its attention to the aftermath. The war that had once threatened their existence had become a defining moment in galactic history. The galaxy now knew that humans were not to be underestimated, and that message echoed far beyond Earth's borders. Once isolated, humanity now stood as a rising power among the stars. But victory hadn't come without cost, and they were keenly aware of what had been sacrificed to achieve it. Across the NIGMA homeworlds, the consequences of their arrogance played out in real time. Civil unrest had spread like wildfire. With their military shattered and their leadership either in hiding or dead, the once mighty NIGMA Empire collapsed under the weight of its own failures. The planets they had subjugated began to rebel, throwing off the yoke of oppression that had kept them under control for so long. Even former allies of the NIGMA turned on them, eager to carve out their own pieces of what was left of the Empire. In the aftermath, human forces carefully monitored the situation but refrained from interfering. They had no interest in conquest or domination. This war had never been about expanding human territory, it had been about survival. Their goal had been simple: stop the NIGMA threat and ensure it could never rise again. Now that the NIGMA were extinct as a power, humanity focused on rebuilding and strengthening their own defenses. Meanwhile, the galaxy watched with a mixture of awe and fear. Species that had once looked down on humanity now reconsidered their views. Diplomatic envoys from across the stars reached out to Earth, seeking alliances and offering trade agreements. Humanity, once an afterthought on the galactic stage, now held a position of respect, even if it was tinged with fear. No one wanted to provoke a species that had brought down the NIGMA Empire in such a decisive and brutal fashion. For Earth, this newfound position came with its own challenges. They had proven their strength, but they understood that they were still relatively new to the complexities of galactic politics. The humans knew that some would try to manipulate or exploit them, while others would seek to undermine their success out of fear of what humanity might become. But this time, they would be ready. They had learned from the NIGMA conflict, preparation and vigilance would ensure their continued survival. Human scientists and military strategists took the lessons from the war and applied them to future technologies. New weapon systems, defensive platforms, and space fleets were developed, ensuring that Earth could defend itself against any threat that might come. Humanity had adapted, and now they were stronger than ever. Their ability to outthink and outfight the NIGMA had come from their ingenuity, and they had no intention of resting on their laurels. In time, the story of the NIGMA's downfall became a cautionary tale, a reminder to the galaxy that underestimating humanity was a fatal mistake. Even as the remnants of the NIGMA Empire faded into obscurity, the memory of their defeat lived on. The phrase, "We warned you," became a grim mantra, whispered in the halls of power across the galaxy, a warning to anyone who might consider testing humanity's resolve again. But Earth didn't revel in the destruction it had caused. The victory over the NIGMA had been necessary, but it wasn't something to celebrate. Humans had always seen themselves as protectors, defenders of their home and their people. They hadn't sought out this conflict, but they had risen to meet it when it came. Now, their focus was on building a future where such wars could be avoided. Yet, the shadow of the NIGMA loomed large. In the quieter corners of the galaxy, whispers spread that some NIGMA loyalists had survived, fleeing to distant systems to regroup. There were rumors of hidden fleets and secret bases, of plans for revenge. But these were just whispers, and humanity, ever watchful, prepared for whatever might come next. They had learned that the price of peace was eternal vigilance, and they were ready to pay it. In the end, the galaxy had changed forever. The NIGMA Empire, once the dominant force in the stars, was now nothing more than a footnote in history, a reminder of what happens when arrogance meets resistance. And humanity, once dismissed as weak and insignificant, had proven itself a force to be reckoned with. They had warned the NIGMA not to mess with them. Now, the galaxy knew why.